Okay, we're back after a small break of me going away up north for a few days. Let's get back on track. Okay, Rav Wolbe and Ali Shor in his Vadim on Seder talks about the chashivus of Seder, the chashivus of progression and of a natural progression, and the fact that when we do things keseder, okay, this echoes very much the Altar of Kelm and Rav Yerucham. When we do things keseder, it's indicative of there being a certain purpose and there being a certain direction. Okay, when la'atid lavo, we're asked the question of whether we were kovea itim l'Torah. So it's famously pointed out, we're not just asked the question of whether we learn Torah, and we're not just asked the question of whether quantitatively we learned a lot of Torah. We're asked the question of whether kavata itim l'Torah, of whether you establish specific times for Torah. And that's not simply an eitzah of saying that if you were, it's not just that if you were kovea itim, then you were successful, okay? But it seems to be that there's something qualitatively different about a Torah which is done b'kvias itim as opposed to a Torah which is done without kvias itim. What we say in Hebrew, mizdamen, okay? That we do in a way whenever it comes up and whenever we have the opportunity. Okay, when we're kovea itim l'Torah, when there's a specific kvius and a specific seder, that's indicative about the Torah, that the Torah is part of a process, is part of a progression to get somewhere. Okay, Rav Yerucham actually speaks about the fact that even ourselves, the way we react to Seder, when we have a day which we did things keseder, when our habits were filled in terms of getting up at a specific time and doing things in a specific way and accomplishing things at their right time. So at the end of a day which we did keseder, which we did in a certain progression, we did it in a certain order, then there's a certain sense of purposefulness and accomplishment. Etzem, just very etzem in the fact that we did things in a progressive way, in a way which indicate that they're going towards a certain direction. Okay, that said, now I want to get into the process a little bit. So in the simplest concept, and we pointed to this last week, but we're going to add little pieces each week. Okay, in the simplest sense, when we talk on the neurological sense, okay, we have to try to at least imagine that the mind is a web of connection of neurons. Okay, it's a connection of neurons where each neuron, without getting into the science exactly how it works, where each neuron, as it, we'll say, fires or ignites, it sets off another neuron. Okay, now you shouldn't think about this as a simple pathway where it's one linear line of simple cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. Okay, we have lots of different things. Each neuron is interconnected with around 10,000 potentially other neurons. This is all different. It's not one line, but there is a progression of where there is a certain cause effect of when one neuron sparks, it hits off another neuron. Now, the concept of plasticity, the concept which we understand, is that we can affect, okay, and we can be involved in the process of what sparks off what, meaning our mind changes with time. And even though it sparks off something automatically, okay, there are all sorts of different things there are different sparks or different connections of neurons which can over time slowly dissipate and break apart, and there are certain connections which can be built. Okay, so as we talk about the habit process, what we're talking about is how do we detach some of the patterns of connections of neurons, and how do we increase or make or build connections of neurons. Okay, what we're gonna point to today is the first, okay, what we refer to as the cue. Okay, if we're looking down at the process, the cue, the stimulus. The first thing which sets off that first neuron or that first phenomena which kicks off this pattern, okay? We're going to break down each pattern in the process over the course of time. Right now we're going to focus just on the nature of the basic nature of that very first neuron. What type of cue or stimulus or starting thing, okay, what starting phenomena, okay, is appropriate or fits as a stimulus which sets off a habit, okay? And this is going to be important in two directions, Okay, keep in mind, in our book, in our workbook, we have a habit which we would like to change, and we have a habit which we'd like to create or build. Okay, so when we talk about a habit which we'd like to build, we're talking about what are the elements which make up an effective and healthy starting neuron, starting cue. Okay, and if we try to pull things apart, a habit which we're trying to break or change, how do we identify what is the starting cue, the kicking, the stimulus? What's kicking off our pattern or our habit? Okay, so let's talk about a few elements which go into a cue. Okay, the first is that in order for something to be an effective stimulus, okay, it has to be something which is independent. It can't have something which we now need to start and indicate. It has to be something which is starting independently from us. Okay, it can't be that we have to do something which then starts off something else. The whole point of a habit is that when something happens, we automatically go into a zone. Okay, it can't be dependent on us initiating the stimulus. So the stimulus has to be something which can be external or something which happens to us, but not something which we are initiating. Okay, what are the type of examples? And we'll talk about different type of examples of stimulus. Okay, we can have something which is an emotion. As soon as I have a certain type of emotion, so there's a certain type of reaction. Okay, now when we talk about a certain type of emotion, it's not necessarily a broad emotion. It could be a certain type of emotion in a certain type of place, in a certain type of scenario, from a specific type of person. Okay, but there's one very specific stimulus, one very specific, could be emotion. It could be one very specific occurrence, right? I walk into the house. Whenever I walk into the house, there's something automatic which happens. It could be a specific time, okay? That when the specific time event happens, automatically there's something which that kicks off, okay? So type of cues or type of stimuluses we can have is it can be a place, it could be a scenario, it could be emotion, it could be an action, it could be an occurrence, okay? But it needs to be two things. It needs to be independent of me. I can't have to create that. It has to be something which happens, okay? It could be something which is happening to me, like an emotion, but it has to be something which happens, and it has to be something which is very specific, okay? We can't start a habit, okay, which is based on in the air, that a habit's going to begin at some random time, okay? It has to be a habit which is going to be beginning very specifically at a very specific time or after a very specific occurrence, okay? We're going to get into more detail, but the first avoda which we're going to have for today is we need to take our two habits, okay? Start off with a habit which we want to break, okay? What we want to do is now in that workbook, in that workspace, we want to try to try to think, okay, of something specific which happens before that habit kicks in. Do I tend to feel a certain way? Is it at a specific time? Is it in a specific place? Does it happen always after something else happens? Okay, so for a habit which I already have, let's try to identify what's the cue which throws me into it. Is it something which I do? Is it something which I bump into? Is it someone I see? It's something which happens. Try to identify different cues for that habit. For that, we'll call it a bad habit, or the habit which we want to change. For a habit which we want to create, let's try to identify right now what type of cue is very specific and very independent of me. That I said, I want, let's say let's say I was trying to create a habit of speech, okay? So whenever someone asks me for something, so whenever I respond, okay, I respond bisimcha. I don't mean with the feeling of bisimcha. I'm saying verbally with the word bisimcha. I will help you, bisimcha. That's a habit of speech that I always respond. I will bisimcha, happily. Okay, my pleasure. Okay, that's a habit of speech. Okay, so on both of those avodas, okay, on both of those habits, try to establish a type of cue and try to identify a cue from a habit which you want to change. What are the different type of cues? What are the different scenarios, places, situations, emotions which happen before that bad habit? And on the other side, what are potential cues of when I want that habit to kick in? Okay, in what scenario do I want that habit to kick in? Okay, and I'm looking forward to continuing more this week.